Part 1, The Invitation. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the windows of Hercule Poirot's London apartment, drumming softly like a polite knock from the heavens. Inside, the great detective sat at his polished mahogany desk, aligning his pens with precise symmetry. Everything, as always, was in perfect order. Poirot believed that disorder in one's environment reflected disorder in one's mind, and his mind, he would often say, was a temple of reason. At precisely 6 o'clock, the bell rang. Poirot, who valued punctuality almost as much as logic, rose immediately. On the threshold stood a young messenger, soaked and shivering, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with crimson wax. The symbol on the seal, an intricate letter L intertwined with a serpent, was unfamiliar to Poirot. "Merci, mon garçon," Poirot said, handing the boy a coin and closing the door. He examined the envelope thoughtfully before slicing it open with his silver letter opener. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, almost regal. "Monsieur Poirot. You are cordially invited to join a private gathering on Lavington Isle this coming Friday. The host, Mr. Edward Lavington, wishes to engage you in a game of intellect and observation. Your travel and stay will be arranged, and your discretion is requested. A boat will await you at Portsmouth Dock, noon sharp. Yours in curiosity. E.L." Poirot read the letter twice, his mustache twitching with intrigue. "A game of intellect," he murmured. "Mon Dieu, these Englishmen and their amusements." But there was something curious in the phrasing, "discretion is requested." That, Poirot knew, was rarely an innocent request. Within the hour, Poirot had made his decision. The letter went into his travel case, his grey suit was pressed, and his faithful companion, Captain Hastings, received a call. "Hastings, mon ami," said Poirot when the line connected, "how would you like to spend a weekend on a private island?" "A holiday?" "Splendid," came Hastings's cheerful voice. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, yes, but when one is invited to an island by a stranger who speaks of intellect and secrecy, it is not the sea breeze I expect, it is the scent of crime." The following morning, the sea mist clung thick over Portsmouth. The dock lay quiet except for gulls crying overhead. A sleek black motorboat waited at the far end, its name painted in gold, the Seraphine. A tall man in a naval coat greeted them with a stiff nod. "Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings?" "Indeed," Poirot replied. "Welcome aboard. Mr. Lavington awaits you at the island. We'll reach by dusk." As they set off, the fog rolled across the water like a living thing, swallowing the mainland until only the endless grey sea remained. Hastings watched the horizon. "Strange, isn't it? No other passengers." "Stranger still," said Poirot quietly, "that the invitation mentioned a gathering, yet we are the only ones expected." The wind howled as they approached the island, a rocky expanse crowned by a towering mansion of stone and glass. The house stood like a fortress against the cliffs, its windows glinting with the last light of day. At the pier, a butler awaited them, an elderly man, pale and silent, who led them through the grand hall without a word. Portraits of solemn ancestors watched from the walls. The air smelled faintly of cedar and candle wax. In the drawing room, 7 guests were assembled, a famous actress with emerald earrings, a retired colonel, a nervous secretary, a widowed art dealer, a young novelist, a doctor, and a quiet woman in mourning black. Each turned as Poirot entered, curiosity flickering in their eyes. And at the center, leaning upon a cane of ivory, stood Edward Lavington. He was tall, thin, with silver hair and a face carved from years of secrets. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice smooth as velvet, "you honor me. Tonight, we begin a most intriguing experiment." Poirot inclined his head. "I am always intrigued, monsieur, when the words experiment and isolation share the same room." Lavington smiled faintly. "You will find the game simple, yet dangerous. Each of my guests hides something, perhaps a lie, perhaps a crime. Your task, Poirot, is to find the truth before the night ends." The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Hastings leaned toward Poirot and whispered, "A bit theatrical, don't you think?" Poirot's eyes glittered. "Theater, mon ami, is the perfect place for murder. Everyone wears a mask." Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. The butler closed the heavy doors, and the lock clicked softly, final, inescapable. Poirot glanced around the grand room, taking in each face, each subtle gesture. Somewhere in that circle of strangers, he felt it already, the faint tremor of deceit. And as the storm rose higher, he murmured to himself, "Before dawn, one of them will be dead." Part 2, The First Murder. The storm had arrived like an uninvited guest, loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Rain lashed against the tall windows of Lavington Manor, drumming over the roof like 1,000 small fists. The wind howled through the chimneys, and the great house groaned in reply, as though it too resented the night. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The guests had gathered for dinner, a lavish affair set in a dining room as long as a railway carriage. Crystal chandeliers flickered above a table of polished oak, silverware gleamed under the wavering light. At the head of the table sat Edward Lavington, the mysterious host whose invitation had brought them all to this remote island. He raised his glass. "To truth," he said softly, "and to those brave enough to seek it." The toast echoed strangely. None of the guests replied. Poirot noticed, the way eyes avoided one another, the awkward clinking of glasses, the faint tremor in the widow's hand as she lifted her wine. It was not the toast of a friendly gathering. It was the toast of strangers forced to smile in the dark. After dinner, they retreated to the drawing room. The storm raged beyond the glass, lightning illuminating the faces like flashes of judgment. A gramophone played an old waltz somewhere, its tune warped and melancholy. Hastings leaned close to Poirot. "I can't make sense of it, old man. Everyone seems on edge. And that host, Lavington, he speaks as if we're part of some performance." Poirot sipped his coffee calmly. "Observation, Hastings. It is always the first key. Look at Madame Alden, the actress. She hides her unease behind smiles too rehearsed. The doctor's hands shake, not from fear, but guilt. The novelist, he watches everyone, yet speaks little. Writers, you see, are thieves of secrets." Hastings frowned. "You think any of them might actually be dangerous?" Poirot's eyes glittered like polished obsidian. "Mon ami, danger wears polite shoes." It was near midnight when the butler appeared, his face pale as candle wax. "Mr. Lavington requests that all guests retire to their rooms. The storm has worsened, and the generator will be shut down soon to conserve power." Reluctantly, the group dispersed. Poirot and Hastings were shown to adjoining rooms along the east corridor, a long, echoing hallway lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow every step. The wind rattled the windows as they entered. Poirot paused at his mirror, adjusting his tie with mechanical precision. "There is a feeling in this house, Hastings. A heaviness, like a play awaiting its final act." Hastings gave a nervous laugh. "You don't suppose?" But Poirot raised a finger. "Shoot, listen." From somewhere deep within the house came the muffled sound of a door closing. Then footsteps. Then silence again. "Strange," said Poirot softly. "At this hour, no one should be wandering." Some time later, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out. The entire mansion sank into darkness. Only the thunder and rain filled the void. Poirot lit a candle. Its small flame threw long, trembling shadows across the room. "Ah," he murmured, "so begins the night." A single scream shattered the silence. It came from the far end of the corridor, a woman's voice, sharp and terrified. Poirot and Hastings rushed out, the candlelight swaying wildly as they ran. Other doors opened, confused faces peered out into the dim hall. The widow, Mrs. Greaves, stood trembling near the staircase. "It's Mr. Lavington," she gasped. In his study, oh God, he's. Poirot pushed past her, his steps quick but measured. The study door was locked. He tried the handle, it rattled, immovable. From inside came no sound. Break it open, Hastings said. Poirot shook his head. Non, my friend. Observe first, always observe. He bent low, examining the doorframe. The key was still in the keyhole, on the inside. The edges of the lock bore faint scratches, as though tampered with. A smell of gunpowder lingered faintly in the air. Then Poirot nodded. Now, Hastings. With one solid kick, Hastings forced the door. It splintered open, and the candlelight revealed the scene within. Edward Lavington sat slumped behind his desk, a revolver resting loosely in his right hand. Blood had spread across his silk waistcoat, glistening darkly under the lightning flashes. A single gunshot wound to the chest. The papers on his desk fluttered in the wind from an open window. Hastings whispered, "Good Lord. Suicide?" Poirot's expression remained unreadable. He stepped closer, eyes darting across every detail, the position of the gun, the overturned glass, the faint scent of cologne mixed with smoke. "Non," he said at last. "It is not suicide. The gun is in the wrong hand." Within minutes, all the guests had gathered at the doorway, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. The actress sobbed quietly. The colonel muttered something about calling the police, though everyone knew the storm had severed the phone lines hours ago. Poirot turned slowly to them. "Mesdames et messieurs, Mr. Lavington is dead. But this is no accident of despair. Someone here has killed him." Gasps filled the air. The novelist dropped his pipe. The doctor took an involuntary step backward. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "We shall not leave this room until I have looked closely at every face. For I tell you, one of you sits before me with guilt heavy upon the soul." Lightning illuminated their faces in brief, haunting flashes. Each expression told its own story, fear, shock, indignation, but in one pair of eyes, Poirot saw something else, a flicker of calculation. He said nothing of it. Not yet. The next morning, the storm had eased, but the island remained shrouded in mist. The body had been moved to the library under Poirot's instruction, and he had spent the dawn hours pacing the scene with his usual precision. Hastings watched from the doorway. "You've been at this for hours, old man. Found anything?" Poirot stopped beside the desk. "Observe, Hastings. The clock on the mantel reads 11:15. But when we entered last night, it had stopped at 10:40. Someone wounded after the death, to mislead." "Mislead? But why?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, mon ami, time is the simplest lie, and the hardest to prove." He knelt beside the rug. "Also, note this, 2 sets of footprints near the window. One belongs to Lavington, his slippers. The other, a smaller size, pointed, perhaps a woman's shoe. And here, ashes on the floor, from a burnt note." He carefully retrieved a fragment from the fireplace grate. Only a few words were legible. He deserved it. Hastings exhaled. Someone hated him. "Oui," said Poirot softly. "But hatred alone does not kill. Hatred plans." By noon, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room once again. The air was heavy with fear and suspicion. No one spoke. The clock ticked too loudly. Poirot stood by the hearth, hands behind his back. "I shall not accuse anyone, yet. But I must ask each of you for truth. Where were you between 10 and 11 last night?" The answers came in turn. The actress had been in her room, rehearsing a scene. The colonel claimed he was writing letters. The widow said she was praying. The doctor insisted he had been asleep. The novelist said he had gone for air near the gallery. The secretary trembled, unable to form a full sentence. And the quiet woman in black whispered simply, "I was watching." Poirot tilted his head. "Watching what, madam?" "Watching him," she said. "Mr. Lavington. From the corridor window. I saw someone enter his study before the shot." A collective breath was drawn. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And who, madam, did you see?" The woman looked down. I'm not sure." The lights flickered. "But I think, it was the doctor." The doctor turned red. "That's absurd." "I wasn't, this is madness." Poirot raised a calming hand. Perhaps. But you see, doctor, madness and murder often share a corridor." He glanced once more at the burnt note fragment in his hand. "He deserved it." Poirot's voice lowered. "One thing is certain, Mes Amos, our late host was no innocent. The question now is not only who killed him, but why everyone else wanted to." The room fell silent again. Outside, the rain began to fall anew, softly but endlessly, as if the heavens themselves refused to wash the island clean. Poirot turned toward the window, his reflection caught in the glass beside the storm. His voice was almost a whisper. "Last night, a man died for a secret. And I fear, before we leave this place, that secret will demand more blood." Part 3, The Alibis. The morning after Edward Lavington's death broke grey and hollow. A thin mist clung to the lawns outside the manor, coiling around the marble statues like ghostly scarves. Inside, the air had the strange stillness of a church after confession. Poirot sat alone in the breakfast room, the remains of a croissant untouched beside his teacup. His little grey cells, as he called them, were already in quiet motion. The tragedy of the previous night had settled into the house like dust, and dust, he knew, hid clues. Hastings entered, looking unusually grave. "They're all awake," he said. "The servants are terrified, the guests are whispering about police boats and prisons. Can't say I blame them." Poirot nodded. "Fear, my dear Hastings, is the greatest revealer. It strips away the polite faces we wear for society and shows us who we truly are." He rose, adjusting his immaculate tie. "It is time, I think, that we see the faces without their masks. Bring them all to the library. One by one. The first interview, Madame Alden." Madame Alden, the celebrated actress, swept into the library wrapped in a silk robe far too glamorous for mourning. She carried herself with the poise of someone accustomed to spotlights, though her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. "Madam," Poirot began gently, "you knew Mr. Lavington before this gathering, yes?" She hesitated. "We met years ago. He was a patron of the theatre." "Nothing improper?" "Improper, no," said Poirot softly. "But emotional, perhaps?" Her painted lips curved into a brittle smile. "You mean, was there scandal?" "There was talk, yes. He admired me, most men did, but that was all." Poirot leaned forward. "And yet, you accepted his invitation to this island." "Curiosity." She looked toward the window. "Guilt, Monsieur Poirot. I owed him, a conversation I never granted. I thought time had softened him." Hastings watched her fidget with a ring, an old diamond piece. Poirot's gaze followed it. "That ring," he asked quietly, "it belonged to Mr. Lavington, did it not?" The actress stiffened. "How could you possibly?" "Because, madam, one does not wear such a masculine design without sentiment attached. You may keep your secrets for now. But remember, sentiment, too, can be motive." The second interview, Colonel Archer. Colonel Archer entered next, his boots polished to a military shine, his jaw set like granite. He saluted Poirot out of habit before sitting stiffly. "Colonel," said Poirot, "I understand you served with Mr. Lavington in the East Indies many years ago." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Served? I commanded." Lavington was a financier, not a soldier. He sponsored certain operations. Arms trade? Asked Poirot. A pause. Then, curtly, supplies. Ah. Poirot tapped a finger on the table. And were those supplies legal, Colonel? Archer's mustache twitched. That's an ugly word, sir. Poirot's tone remained mild. And yet, necessary. Because when ugly things are hidden, they tend to crawl back at inconvenient hours. The Colonel's hands clenched on his knees. If you're implying I killed that man, you're wrong. I despised him, yes, but I'd sooner face a court-martial than stoop to murder. Poirot bowed his head slightly. Sometimes, mon Colonel, pride is a sharper weapon than any pistol. We shall see which drew blood. The third interview, Mrs. Greaves, the widow. She arrived like a shadow of grief, her black veil trembling as she walked. Her eyes were red, but her expression oddly composed. Madam, Poirot said softly, I regret to distress you further. But I must ask, did you know Mr. Lavington before this gathering? Her voice was quiet, almost mechanical. He was my husband's partner. My husband died 5 years ago in an accident, or so I thought. An accident? Poirot repeated. She nodded. A factory fire. The insurance was denied. Mr. Lavington bought the ruins and tripled his fortune. I confronted him once. He called my husband careless and offered me hush money. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Good heavens. Mrs. Greaves looked directly at Poirot. Do I hate him? Yes. Did I kill him? No. Because some men, Monsieur Poirot, deserve to die at the hands of God, not mine. Poirot studied her for a moment. A powerful sentiment, madam. But vengeance often mistakes itself for justice. We shall see which visited Mr. Lavington. The fourth interview, Dr. Merrick. The doctor entered briskly, carrying the smell of antiseptic and cigarettes. His eyes darted toward the covered window where rain still whispered. Poirot wasted no time. Dr. Merrick, last night you were accused of entering Mr. Lavington's study before the gunshot. Do you deny this? I do, Merrick said sharply. I was in my room reading. I heard the shot, same as everyone. That woman's imagination is diseased. Poirot's gaze lowered to the doctor's hands. You are left-handed, doctor. Yes, what of it? Poirot nodded slowly. The bullet entered from the right side of the chest. The gun was found in the right hand. Yet our host was left-handed, as shown by the ink stains on that hand's middle finger. So, the murderer, perhaps, used the opposite hand to stage the scene. The doctor paled. You're saying? I am saying, Poirot interrupted gently, that whoever killed Mr. Lavington knew of his left-handedness, and wished us to believe he took his own life. But I make no accusation, only an observation. Merrick's composure cracked. You have no proof. Poirot smiled faintly. Not yet, doctor. But proof is like medicine, it must be administered at the right dose and time. Part 4, The Past Unraveled. The storm had passed, but the island felt no lighter. A pale dawn crept through the clouds, washing the manor in a sickly silver hue. The sea was calm now, too calm, like a beast that had eaten and slept satisfied. Poirot stood at the window of the library, his reflection framed by the long shelves of books. Behind him the room smelled of dust, candle smoke, and the faint trace of blood that no fire could disguise. Hastings entered quietly. They're restless again. No boat has come. The servants swear the radio is dead. Dead? Poirot turned slowly. Nothing on this island dies without reason, Hastings. Even the silence. He gestured for him to sit. On the table lay a neat array of items, a torn map, a silver cigarette case, 2 burnt letters, and a revolver taken from Lavington's desk. Each, Poirot believed, spoke its own language. The discovery in the study. They returned to the study once more, though the body had long been removed. The curtains hung limp and the air carried the peculiar sweetness of dried blood. Poirot moved with small, deliberate steps, studying the bookshelves. "Look here," he murmured. A faint rectangular outline marked the wall where a painting had recently hung. Something was removed. Hastings helped him lift a chair to reach the spot. Behind the outline, half hidden under a thin layer of dust, a small brass latch waited. Poirot pressed it. A narrow panel clicked open, revealing a compartment barely large enough to hold a box. Inside lay a stack of yellow documents bound with twine. The top page read, "Lavington and Archer Trading Company, 1914 to 1918, confidential ledgers." "Good heavens," Hastings whispered. So the colonel was right, there was some kind of operation. Poirot unfolded the first sheet. It listed transactions, supplies, shipments, coded entries in red ink. At the bottom of one page, shipment 37, surplus munitions, Q. Q. Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Q stands for Quetta, a campaign in which hundreds perished from defective ammunition. It appears our Mr. Lavington sold weapons of poor manufacture to both sides. Hastings exhaled. Then he made his fortune out of dead men. Poirot replaced the file gently. And perhaps purchased his own death with it. The hidden photograph. As they searched further, Poirot found another object tucked inside a ledger, a sepia photograph, brittle at the edges. It showed a group of officers in uniform, standing before a supply depot. In the center, younger, cleaner-shaven, stood Edward Lavington. To his left, Colonel Archer. And behind them, almost hidden by shadow, a man Hastings did not recognize. "Who's that in the back?" Hastings asked. Poirot studied the face. "Not a soldier. See the spectacles, the civilian stance. Perhaps an accountant or clerk." He flipped the photograph over. In faded ink was scrawled a single name, Henry Greaves. Hastings' eyes widened. Greaves, the widow's husband. "Exactment," said Poirot softly. "He was part of Lavington's enterprise. And he died conveniently when the scandal might have emerged. The factory fire was no accident, it was erasure." He placed the photograph on the desk as thunder muttered far out to sea. "Now, Hastings, we understand the motive of at least one guest. But truth rarely belongs to one person. It has many owners, and each kills to protect their share." The gathering. Poirot summoned everyone once more to the drawing room. The guests came reluctantly, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. The great hall had grown colder, even the fire struggled to live. He faced them calmly. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have uncovered documents which tell us that Mr. Lavington's wealth came from the trade of death. He profited from war, from deceit, from the ruin of men." A murmur swept the room. The widow's gloved hand trembled. Colonel Archer's jaw tightened. The actress pressed her ringed fingers to her lips. Poirot continued, "Among these papers is the name of a man who perished because of Lavington's greed, Henry Greaves." Mrs. Greaves let out a faint cry. "Then he did kill my husband." "Yes, madam. But you were not the only one wronged. Colonel Archer lost men by those same faulty arms. The doctor treated the survivors. Even the secretary here," he nodded toward the pale young man, "was once employed by Lavington's company, though under another name. Do you wish to deny it, Mr. Niles?" The secretary's face drained of color. I was an accountant. I handled the ledgers. But when I realized what he'd done, he ruined me. Said I forged the books. And you fled," said Poirot. "Until the invitation called you back. How curious, n'est-ce pas? That all who carried guilt or grievance should receive the same summons. The letter of summons." Hastings frowned. But who sent those letters, if Lavington himself is dead? Poirot looked around the silent room. That, mon ami, is the question that should chill us. Because if he did not send them, then someone wanted us all here, for justice, or for revenge. He turned toward the butler standing in the doorway. Tell me, Monsieur Harland, when the invitations were dispatched, who carried them? The butler hesitated. I did, sir. Mr. Lavington dictated each one himself a fortnight ago. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the seals? Each bore his mark. I swear it. Then either the dead man summoned his own executioners, or someone forged his voice. Both possibilities are equally theatrical. He paced slowly before the fire. But consider, Lavington knew he was hated. What better amusement for such a man than to invite all his enemies and boast of their dependence? Perhaps he wished to play God for one night more. The widow's revelation. Mrs. Greaves rose suddenly. You don't understand, Monsieur Poirot. He sent me a letter months ago, before this one. He said he had evidence that my husband wasn't the innocent the first believed. He said Henry helped falsify those accounts, that he shared the profits. The room stirred. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And did you believe him? I didn't want to. But he promised to show me proof here, on this island. Then you came not for vengeance, but for truth. Her voice broke. I came for peace. Poirot inclined his head. And yet, madam, peace has never followed deceit. Poirot's reflection. When the meeting dispersed, the manor seemed to exhale, doors closing softly, whispers retreating down corridors. Poirot remained by the fireplace, staring at the ledgers spread before him. Each page was a confession written in numbers, profit margins, shipment codes, dates of death masked as expenses. He thought of Lavington's last toast, to truth. The irony of it lingered like poison. Hastings returned with 2 cups of coffee. So that's it, then. Everyone had a reason. Oui, said Poirot quietly. And yet reason alone does not spill blood. There is something theatrical in this crime, too precise, too dramatic. Whoever killed him wanted more than justice. They wanted spectacle. He turned the photograph again in his fingers, studying the shadows behind the smiling faces. Tell me, Hastings, do you see that faint outline beside Henry Greaves? Someone was cropped out of this photograph. Someone whose presence was inconvenient. Cropped? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, the art of disappearance. Every murderer must first erase himself from his own story. He laid the photograph down, aligning its corners with obsessive care. Outside, the sea whispered against the cliffs. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked, the sound of someone moving when they thought no one listened. Poirot's eyes lifted toward the ceiling. Yes, he murmured, the past speaks again. And it has not finished its tale. Part 5, The Second Death. The night was iron dark. Rain came again, not in storm but in a steady whisper, sliding down the windows like tears. Inside the manor, the guests had locked themselves in their rooms. The corridors were hushed, yet alive with unseen movement, the creak of timber, the sigh of the sea wind in the chimneys, the nervous rhythm of hearts that no longer trusted sleep. Poirot sat awake by a dying fire in the library, his notebook open, the clock ticking faintly. Every name on his list had been underlined twice, each motive measured and weighed. Yet the balance would not settle. Something eluded him, a detail too quiet, too neat. He rose at last and crossed the hall. One murder never walks alone, he murmured. It invites company. The scream. At 2 a.m, a scream shattered the silence. A woman's cry, sharp, terrified, then abruptly cut short. Doors flew open along the corridor, lamps flickered to life, and voices collided in confusion. Poirot was already there, moving swiftly, Hastings at his side. The scream had come from the east wing. They found the actress, Miss Delane, standing outside her door, her face white as chalk. "What happened, mademoiselle?" I heard someone in the next room." A thud, a gasp, and then nothing. The next room belonged to Mr. Niles, the secretary. Poirot knocked once. No answer. He turned the handle. The door opened easily. Inside, the lamp still burned. Mr. Niles lay slumped in a chair by the writing desk, head tilted back, a dark stain spreading beneath his chin. On the floor lay an overturned glass and a half-empty bottle of brandy. Poirot bent close, eyes narrowing. "He is dead. The brandy smells of almonds." "Poison?" Hastings whispered. "Cyanide, mon ami. Quick, effective, and theatrical." He straightened, gazing around the room. Another death, so soon. Someone grows desperate, or wishes to direct our gaze elsewhere. The note. Poirot examined the desk. On the blotter lay a single sheet of paper, hastily written. "I cannot bear the guilt. I alone am responsible for Lavington's death. Forgive me. Niles." Hastings exhaled. "A suicide note. Perhaps." Poirot touched the edge of the paper. "But look, the ink is dry, yet the pen lies capped. Why would a man cap his pen before taking poison?" He turned the page to the light. "Also, the handwriting, it trembles, yes, but the tremor is wrong. It is the tremor of imitation, not of fear." Miss Delane covered her mouth. "You mean he was murdered?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Murder staged as confession, a convenient silence." The room search. He ordered everyone to remain in the corridor while he searched. The windows were latched from inside. The door had no lock. The glass of brandy bore 2 fingerprints, one of Niles, one not. Poirot wrapped the glass in a handkerchief. Someone visited him. He expected them. He poured 2 drinks. "Then the killer must be one of us," Hastings said grimly. "Indeed, and with each death, the circle grows smaller, and more dangerous." Poirot's gaze moved to the bookshelf. A single volume was missing from the neat row, The Merchant of Venice. "Curious choice," he murmured. "A play about justice and debt. Our murderer, it seems, enjoys irony. The confrontation." By dawn, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room once more. Their faces were grey, their eyes hollowed by fear. The sound of the sea pounded against the cliffs like an impatient hand. Poirot stood by the hearth. "Mr. Niles is dead. It appears to be suicide, but I do not believe in such convenient conclusions." Colonel Archer slammed his fist on the table. "Then what are you saying, that one of us poisoned him in his room while we all slept?" "Yes, Colonel. Someone who feared that Mr. Niles might speak." The widow shuddered. "But what could he have known?" "That," Poirot said softly, "is precisely what I intend to discover." He turned to Miss Delane. "You heard the scream. Did you see anyone in the corridor?" She hesitated. "Only, a shadow. Someone tall." They moved toward the stairs. "Which stairs?" "The servants' staircase, near the kitchen." Poirot's eyes flickered. "Merci, mademoiselle. The servants, yes, they are the unseen eyes of any house. And yet, no servant claims to have heard a thing. How strange. The servants lie." Later, Poirot found the butler, Harland, in the pantry polishing silver. The man's face was drawn, his hands shaking slightly. "Monsieur Harland," Poirot said gently, "you are a man of precision. Tell me, last night, did anyone leave their room after midnight?" The butler swallowed. "No, sir. I heard nothing." Poirot's gaze dropped to the floor. "And yet, the footprints near the east wing corridor, small, sharp heels, crossing the carpet where you had cleaned yesterday. Not a lady's shoe, not quite. Perhaps the shoes of a manservant. Size 8, I think. Harland froze. I don't know what you mean. Poirot's tone remained calm. It is a dangerous thing to lie, monsieur. Lies are like dust, they settle, and I see them always. The butler's eyes darted away. I heard something, a whisper, maybe. I thought it was the wind. I swear it. Poirot said nothing. He merely adjusted his cuffs and turned toward the door. If you remember more, you will tell me. Because silence, too, can kill. The revelation in the garden. At noon, Poirot went outside. The rain had ceased, leaving the garden slick and glistening. He followed the gravel path toward the cliffs, where the wind carried the cry of gulls and the scent of the sea. There, half buried in the wet earth near a bench, something gleamed, a small, silver lighter engraved with the initials E.L. Edward Lavington, Hastings murmured. But why would his lighter be here? Poirot knelt, brushing off the dirt. Perhaps it was dropped during a meeting the night he died. Or perhaps it was placed here later, to draw us away. He pocketed it carefully. The murderer is clever, but too fond of performance. Every act must have an audience, and every illusion leaves a trace. The secret room. That evening, Poirot and Hastings examined the upper floors. In a corner of the east wing, behind a faded tapestry, they found a narrow door hidden by age and dust. It opened into a cramped chamber, bare walls, an old trunk, and the faint smell of oil and paper. Inside the trunk lay torn photographs, half-burned letters, and a single page of a diary. The handwriting matched Lavington's. They will come for me. I have invited them, one by one. Let the past be judged. The truth, if it exists, will die with me. Hastings frowned. So he knew. He wanted this. Yes, Poirot said softly. A man who lives by deceit cannot resist one final drama. But he miscalculated, the players in his theater do not follow his script. He closed the trunk gently. The second death was not part of his design. Someone else has taken control of the play. Poirot's deduction. Night returned, heavy with unease. Poirot sat alone in the library again, the brandy glass before him, the suicide note beside the candle. 2 deaths, he murmured. One born of pride, one of fear. The first shouted its innocence, the second whispered guilt. But both were orchestrated by a mind that understands emotion as weapon. He lifted the note to the flame, watching it curl. You are clever, yes, but you underestimate order. You think chaos hides you. It does not. Outside, lightning flared again over the sea. Poirot's reflection flickered in the glass window, small, precise, immovable. Tomorrow, he whispered, we set the trap. Part 6, The False Lead. The morning after the second death dawned without sun. The island lay beneath a lid of grey sky, gulls wheeled low, their cries thin and distant. The manor seemed smaller now, its corridors colder, as if the house itself had begun to shrink from what it contained. Poirot breakfasted alone. The coffee was lukewarm, the toast untouched. He was reading, not eating, the diary page from the hidden chamber. Its final line returned to him again and again, the truth, if it exists, will die with me. Non, he said softly to the empty room. The truth never dies, it waits. A change in the air. By mid-morning the atmosphere had shifted. The guests had ceased whispering in corners, now they watched each other openly, eyes narrowed, every movement weighed for meaning. Fear had grown blunt, replaced by something harder, suspicion. Colonel Archer stood by the window, pipe clenched in his teeth. If that Belgian doesn't name a killer soon, there'll be another body before nightfall. Miss Delane, draped in silk despite the chill, gave a thin smile. Perhaps that is what he wants, a third act. At that moment Poirot entered, immaculate as ever, his mustaches perfect, his gaze sharp as glass. "You speak of acts, mademoiselle. Indeed, a play requires an ending, and we approach ours." He set a small envelope upon the table. "Inside are photographs taken from the trunk upstairs. Each shows our host with one of you. Each of you believed you were his special guest. But, Mes Amos, you were all pieces upon his board." They stared. Poirot continued, "Yet someone rearranged his board. Someone clever enough to move a piece twice, and to hide the hand that moved it. The decoy." That afternoon Poirot requested that everyone gather again after dinner. He then whispered something to Hastings, who nodded and disappeared toward the cellar. When the appointed hour arrived, the drawing room was dimly lit, rain drummed softly on the windows. On the mantel lay an object covered by a white cloth. Poirot stood beside it. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "I have made a discovery that changes everything." He drew back the cloth. Underneath rested the revolver taken from Lavington's desk, cleaned, polished, and shining. "This weapon," Poirot declared, "was not used to kill our host. The bullet recovered from his body does not match its chamber. Therefore the true murder weapon remains hidden. I will now ask each of you to step forward and examine this pistol. The one who flinches reveals themselves." One by one they obeyed. Colonel Archer grunted and handled it with soldier's ease. Miss Delane touched it lightly, a tremor in her fingers. The widow, pale, refused at first, then forced herself to hold it, weeping quietly. The butler looked away, whispering a prayer. No one confessed. Poirot replaced the cloth. "Très bien. Then perhaps the pistol itself will confess." He lifted it again, and fired. A blank cartridge exploded with a flash. Miss Delane screamed. Colonel Archer lunged forward, hand to his coat pocket. Poirot's voice sliced the moment, "You will remove your hand, Colonel." The colonel froze. Slowly, he drew out not a gun but a folded letter. Poirot took it, unfolded it, and read aloud. "If you speak of Quetta, you die next. E.L." Gasps rippled through the room. Poirot lowered the paper. A threat from the dead? Non. A forgery meant to silence the colonel, and to mislead me. He turned, eyes bright. "You see, my friends, our murderer plants fear like breadcrumbs, hoping we follow. But the path leads nowhere. It is the classic false lead. The cellar revelation." After the guests dispersed, Poirot descended to the cellar where Hastings waited. On the table stood 2 bottles of brandy, one half empty, the other unopened. Beside them, a small metal vial. Hastings pointed. "Found this behind a beam. Cyanide residue." Poirot smiled faintly. "As I expected. Our murderer keeps trophies." He lifted the vial, sniffed it once, then replaced it. But note, the label beneath the grime reads, "Photography Developer." It was stolen from the house laboratory, not the kitchen. So the killer knows chemistry, someone accustomed to the careful measure of drops. Like the doctor, Hastings said quietly. Or like a secretary who once balanced ledgers, but he is dead. So perhaps the doctor indeed. Yet, Poirot's eyes gleamed. Too obvious, mon ami. A false trail again. The mind behind these murders hides behind reason, knowing we seek it. The mirror trap. That night, Poirot prepared his trap. He requested that each guest remain in their rooms until summoned. Then he arranged mirrors in the corridor outside the library, small shaving mirrors borrowed from the bathrooms, fixed at angles upon chairs, so that he might watch the door from multiple reflections. An old trick, he told Hastings softly. The guilty cannot pass a mirror without glancing. They fear to see themselves. At midnight, footsteps echoed. Poirot crouched behind the half-open door. The mirrors caught a fleeting image, a figure cloaked in dark dressing gown, carrying a lantern. The face turned once toward the glass, the widow, she moved to the library door, entered, and closed it behind her. Poirot followed silently. Inside, the widow stood before the fireplace, holding something in her hands, the missing volume, The Merchant of Venice. From between its pages she drew a small envelope and fed it to the fire. Poirot lifted the silver lighter from his pocket. Dropped near the cliffs, yes. Engraved EL, but the engraving fresh, not old. You forged it to frame the dead. You made every clue point backward. Yet you forgot the most important thing, order. Even chaos leaves pattern, and I, Hercule Poirot, live for patterns. For a moment Harlan stood motionless. Then the silver in his hand fell with a soft chime. Epilogue. By dawn, Harlan was under guard in the pantry, silent, staring at nothing. The storm had cleared, a pale light spread over the sea. Poirot watched it from the terrace, hands clasped behind his back. Hastings joined him. So it's done. Poirot nodded slowly. Done, yes. But not ended. Justice, mon ami, is never tidy. It leaves crumbs of sorrow for those who live. He turned once toward the house where the others still slept, the widow, the soldier, the actress. Each carried their fragment of guilt, each would return to a world that had already judged them. Poirot lifted his hat to the wind. The false lead has served its purpose. Now, the final act awaits. Part 7, The Gathering. 1. The silence before the storm. For the first time in days, the island lay still. The wind had died, the surf below the cliffs rolled in soft sighs, and the sky glowed with the dull pewter light that comes before heavy rain. Yet inside the manor there was no peace. The rooms held the stale air of fear and sleeplessness, and the remaining guests moved like ghosts, avoiding one another's eyes. Poirot spent the early hours in the library, pacing in tight circles. The great detective, so neat, so composed, was restless. The truth had revealed itself, yet it felt incomplete, like a tapestry missing its final thread. Harlan had confessed, yes, but not entirely. Poirot sensed something larger, a design that reached beyond a butler's revenge. Hastings found him staring out toward the sea. You've barely eaten, old chap, surely the case is over. Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. Non, Hastings. The case is finished, perhaps, but not complete. You remember the diary, let the past be judged. The truth, if it exists, will die with me. It means there is a truth greater than Harlan's guilt. There is a hand behind his hand. He closed his notebook with a sharp snap. Tonight, we will gather everyone. Tonight, the theater ends. 2. Preparations for the revelation. All afternoon, Poirot moved about the manor with measured calm. He instructed the cook to prepare supper precisely for 7, he asked the servants to light every chandelier in the dining hall. He even polished the silver candlesticks himself, humming softly under his breath. Hastings watched, bewildered. You're setting a stage. Exactment. The murderer craves an audience. So I shall give him one. And when the curtain falls, there will be no applause. As dusk deepened, Poirot arranged the dining table, 8 chairs, one for each soul who had come to the island, though 2 of them were now empty. At the head of the table he placed an unlit candle beside Lavington's photograph. 3. The guests arrive. At 7 precisely, they gathered. The colonel, rigid in his posture, eyes sharp and weary. Miss Delane, her face powdered but trembling beneath the mask of poise. The widow, veiled in black, her gloved hands clutching a handkerchief soaked through. The doctor, pale and drawn, avoiding everyone's gaze. And in the corner, under guard, sat Harlan, silent, his wrists bound loosely. Poirot stood at the head, immaculate as always, the candlelight catching the steel glint of his cufflinks. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice calm but carrying through the hall, we have reached the final chapter. You have seen 2 deaths, heard 1 confession, and believed perhaps that the case was solved. But I tell you, it is not. What we have seen so far is only the prelude to the real crime. The room seemed to shrink around his words. 4. The truth re-examined. Poirot lifted the diary page once more. This, you remember, was written by Lavington himself. He invited you here to judge him. But he was not a man to seek judgment, he was a man to seek control. He planned every moment, the dinner, the toasts, even his own death. The widow gasped. You mean he staged it? Poirot nodded. He intended to fake his murder, to vanish, to watch you all destroy one another. He hired Harland to assist him. In exchange, Harland would be paid and freed from his own guilt. But then, Lavington betrayed even his accomplice. He planned to expose him instead. So, Harland turned upon him, and made the play real. Colonel Archer's pipe clattered against the table. Good God! Poirot's gaze moved to each face in turn. And yet, even that is not the full truth. There was another who knew of this scheme, who fed Harland's hatred, who placed the poison, who forged the note, because that person desired not only Lavington's death, but the destruction of everyone who ever profited from him. He paused. That person is in this room. A murmur rose, chairs scraped, breath quickened. Miss Delane whispered, You mean one of us? We. 5. The doctor's mask. Poirot turned toward the doctor. Dr. Reed, you tended Lavington's ailments, did you not? Yes, the man stammered. His heart, his nerves, he was in poor health. Indeed. And you provided his medicine, including cyanide, for laboratory use? The doctor's lips thinned. A small quantity, locked in my case. Locked, yes, but the key? The doctor hesitated. I kept it with me. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then tell me, why did Hastings find that same key in the cellar, wrapped in a scrap of your handkerchief? The doctor's shoulders sagged. I dropped it, after Niles's death. I panicked. Panicked, or ensured that we would believe you dropped it. Poirot's tone was gentle but merciless. You wished to direct suspicion toward yourself, a noble confession, a doctor's guilt. But you are not noble, mon cher. You are theatrical. The doctor's hand twitched toward his coat pocket. Poirot raised a finger. Do not reach for the pistol. It has been unloaded. The man froze. His mask cracked. How did you know? Because you are too careful to risk a random death. You planned every moment, even your exposure. 6. The confession. The doctor's voice rose, hoarse and bitter. He ruined lives. My father worked for Lavington's company, he took the blame for the Quetta disaster and shot himself in disgrace. I was a child. I swore I'd make the old man pay. When he called me here, I saw my chance. He stood trembling, the candlelight carving hollows in his face. I didn't kill Niles for pleasure, he was about to betray me. And Harland. Harland was a tool, nothing more. Poirot's expression was grave, almost sorrowful. Revenge, doctor, is the most precise of poisons. It kills both the target and the hand that pours it. Hastings stepped forward, but Poirot held up a hand. Let him speak. The doctor's voice broke. You can't understand. The war destroyed us. He profited while we buried the dead. I only gave him what he deserved. Poirot nodded slowly. Perhaps. But justice delivered in secret is not justice. It is vanity dressed as virtue. 7. The storm breaks. Outside, thunder cracked, the windows rattled. The candle flames trembled. The atmosphere in the dining hall grew electric, fear, anger, guilt, all colliding in the flicker of light. Poirot moved to the head of the table and lit the single candle beside Lavington's photograph. This is the flame of truth, he said softly. And it burns for all of you. The doctor slumped into his chair. Harland muttered, he'll hang for it. Poirot turned sharply. No. The hangman is unnecessary. Look at him, the punishment is already written upon his face. The doctor stared at the candle, his voice barely audible. I wanted the world to remember him as a monster. Poirot's tone softened. And now it will remember you as his shadow. You became what you despised. 8. The aftermath. When the storm passed, it left behind a strange calm. The authorities arrived the next morning, the doctor was taken quietly, without struggle. The remaining guests packed their belongings in silence, each wearing the hollow look of those who have stared too long at death. On the terrace, Poirot stood with Hastings, watching the grey sea swallow the horizon. So it ends, Hastings said. Poirot smiled faintly. No, mon ami. Nothing ends. Each crime leaves behind echoes, small vibrations that tremble through those who survive. That is the true punishment. He glanced back at the manor, the shuttered windows, the extinguished lamps. Do you know, Hastings, what fascinates me? The human heart craves order, yet it invents chaos to feel alive. Even murder, sometimes, is a form of longing. Hastings shook his head. I'll never understand how you can find poetry in something so horrible. Poirot adjusted his hat. Because, my friend, to understand horror is to prevent it. To ignore it is to invite its return. 9. Poirot's final reflection. As the boat finally arrived to take them from the island, Poirot lingered a moment longer on the dock. The wind tugged at his coat, the waves lapped against the stones like whispers. He looked back at the manor one last time. Edward Lavington built his fortune on deceit. Those who came here built their lives on the ruins of his choices. In the end, truth claimed them all, not by chance, but by balance. He turned toward Hastings, who waited impatiently by the gangway. Tell me, mon ami, Poirot said quietly, what is justice? Hastings frowned. When the guilty are punished. Poirot smiled, a sad curve of the lips. Non. Justice is when the innocent may sleep. The boat pulled away from the dock. The island receded into mist, a lonely silhouette, soon lost to the sea. Poirot took one last look at the fading shore. The case of Edward Lavington, he murmured, was never about murder. It was about conscience. And conscience, Hastings, is the most relentless detective of all. Part 8, The Truth at Midnight. 1. The last evening. Night descended slowly, wrapping the island in thick fog. The storm had passed, yet its echo lived in the restless sea. Inside the manor, the air smelled of smoke, wax, and the lingering dread of confession. Every room seemed to breathe. Poirot sat in the drawing room, motionless before the dying fire. The case was solved, or so the world would say, but his mind would not rest. Too many details refused to lie still, the second set of footprints outside the study window, the misdated letter found in the fireplace, the unburned corner of the diary page. These were threads left untied, and Poirot could not abide disorder. He whispered to himself, there is still a hand I have not seen. Hastings entered quietly with 2 cups of coffee. You've been staring at that hearth for an hour. The doctor's gone, the authorities are satisfied. What more is there? Poirot's voice was low. My friend, there is always the more. There is always the motive behind the motive. The doctor believed himself the author, yet he was but a chapter in another's book. The clock struck 11. Poirot rose. Midnight approaches. It is time for the final performance. 2. The candlelit summons. He called them one last time, the remaining guests, the servants, even the constable who guarded the manor gates. The library glowed with 100 candles, each flame mirrored in the polished glass of portraits staring down from the walls. The mood was heavy, funereal. The widow sat rigid as stone, the colonel glared into his untouched drink, Miss Delane clutched her pearls as if they were rosary beads. Poirot took his place at the head of the long mahogany table. Mesdames et messieurs, I beg your patience once more. The curtain has fallen, but the playwright is still unseen. He held up a letter sealed in black wax. This arrived on the morning boat, addressed to me, posted 2 days before Mr. Lavington's death. Shall I read? The widow's breath caught, the others leaned forward. Monsieur Poirot. If you are reading this, then my plan has been completed, though perhaps not as I intended. The island will stand as my tribunal, each guest bears a sin I once profited from. Yet I will not face judgment, I will deliver it. Should my death occur sooner than planned, you will know the hand that struck the final blow was mine in spirit. E.L. Hastings frowned. He expected his own death. Poirot smiled faintly. He orchestrated it. But he misjudged the audience. There was one more player on his stage. 3. The Widow's Shadow. Poirot turned toward Mrs. Greaves, who sat trembling. Madam, may I inquire once more about your husband's accident? Her eyes flickered. I have told you everything. Non, madam. You told me what you believed. But the fire that took his life, was it accident, or arrangement? The insurance was denied, yet someone benefited. That someone, I find, was you. Gasps rippled through the room. She rose, face pale beneath her veil. That's a lie. Poirot's tone softened. No. Your husband discovered the factory fraud. He planned to expose Lavington, but the fire destroyed the evidence, and him. A convenient tragedy, yes. You collected nothing then, but when Lavington offered hush money years later, you took it. And when he summoned you here, you came to reclaim your final payment, revenge. The widow's lips trembled. You can't prove. Proof, madam. There is the matchbook found in your room with the same rare wax used in Lavington's study. There is the missing page from his diary, torn by a gloved hand after his death, the glove you burned this morning in the stove. Her knees gave way, she sank into the chair. He ruined everything, she whispered. My husband, my life, my name. I only wanted him to feel what I felt. Poirot bowed his head. And so you did. Yet in killing him, you killed the last witness to your own suffering. The room was silent except for the ticking clock. Then she looked up, tears glistening through the veil. What will happen to me? Poirot's eyes were sad. That, madam, depends on what remains of your soul. 4. Midnight Truth. The constable escorted her away, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone amid the guttering candles. Rain began again outside, light and steady. Hastings exhaled. So it was the widow all along. Good heavens, Poirot, you've kept that card close. Poirot smiled wearily. It was she who poisoned the doctor's conscience, who whispered of justice until he believed vengeance divine. Every act upon this island was her orchestration, subtle, unseen. She wished not only to kill Lavington, but to punish everyone who had survived his greed. He moved to the window. A woman scorned by the world creates her own court. But guilt, Hastings, is a flame that consumes its bearer first. 5. The dawn after. By morning the sea was calm, the fog lifting like a curtain at the end of a performance. The manor stood quiet, the guests had departed, leaving behind silence and a few scattered petals from last night's candles. Poirot sat on the terrace with a fresh cup of coffee, the first rays of sun warming his face. Hastings joined him, notebook in hand. You'll write your report now? Poirot shook his head. Non. Some truths are not for the papers. Let the world think the doctor was the killer, it is enough. The widow's penance will be her own memory. Justice sometimes requires discretion. Hastings looked puzzled. And what of you, Poirot? Do you ever grow tired of seeing so much deceit? Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, deceit is only the mask worn by pain. Remove it, and you will always find a wound beneath. 6. Poirot's reflection. When their boat finally left the island, Poirot stood at the stern, watching the manor fade into the distance. The sea glittered silver beneath the pale morning sun. He murmured, half to himself. Edward Lavington sought to escape his own sins through spectacle. The doctor sought redemption through blood. The widow sought peace through vengeance. Yet all found the same end, emptiness. He touched his hat as the island disappeared into the haze. For all our cleverness, Hastings, the heart remains the most dangerous mystery. Hastings closed his notebook slowly. And what shall I call this case in your records? Poirot smiled, eyes glinting. Call it, The Truth at Midnight. For it was at that hour the masks fell, and the souls of men were seen without disguise. The end.